The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF.
I'm Amber Bell, and this is Real Agriculture. Today we're here to do a Pulse School, and I'm speaking with Robyne Davidson of Lakeland College. We're going to be talking about Aphanomyces, and specifically host versus non-host crops, because I think that's something that's not really discussed all that much. So
yeah, there can be a little bit of confusion. If you're a producer and you have peas on your farm, and you're interested in introducing an alternative pulse crop, which ones are going to make the problem worse, and which ones are going to help potentially, and what would be a good rotational option on the farm.
And then when we speak about host crops, I think the general perception is, okay, well, peas, you know, that's what you're looking at. You've been working on lupins, and so with lupins, you were telling me that that's not a host crop.
Yeah.
So you could still have pulses growing without necessarily raising your risk for Aphanomyces.
Yes, lupins is a crop that we consider a non-host. And what I mean by that is, in order to have, you know, a disease in your field, you need the host, you need the environment, and you need the disease. So in the case of a field that has the Aphanomyces spores there and wet conditions, if you don't have the host, you don't have disease. And lupin is considered one of those crops that is a non-host, which means the oospores don't actually wake up and recognize, hey, there's a pulse crop there, and so it doesn't contribute to an increasing spore load. Whereas some of our other pulse crops could potentially, and that's where it gets a little bit confusing. Is it actually resistant, or is it a non-host? So the different pulse crops will vary a little bit in that. So
right. So what are some of those alternative pulses? I know faba beans is a big one that growers are starting. We're starting to see more of it in the prairies. So what are some of the alternative pulses that maybe you can use instead of the host crops?
Well, it depends on where you are in the province, okay? So we have been trying to grow soybeans in this province, and we're having a little bit of trouble in Alberta just because of our cool nights. And we don't quite have the growing conditions for soybean. Soybean is considered another one of those non-hosts. So you can put a soybean pulse crop into your rotation and not contribute to your oospore loads, okay? Chickpeas would be an alternative pulse crop, which again, is only really going to be an option in certain areas of Alberta, certainly, you know, in the south where it's a little bit drier. And it is not considered a true non-host. It is considered resistant. And what I mean by that is if you put a soybean into a field that has Aphanomyces in it, and then you grab roots off that soybean field and then look at it, you will find oospores. But you will not find any symptomology, and Aphanomyces doesn't make soybeans sick. So we call it resistant as opposed to a non-host, because you will find spores in there. Faba bean is one where we're quite certain right now that we have resistance, but we're quite sure it's not a non-host, right? As more and more Aphanomyces pathotypes are starting to show up, as you know, Aphanomyces spreads, like most pathogens do, they mutate and more pathotypes start showing up. We're starting to wonder if maybe some of those pathotypes might be going over into faba beans. So we're not worried, don't want to create a panic here, but we are just keeping an eye on that, just to make sure that we don't have that kind of crossover. So I would say, like lupins and soybeans, non-host. Chickpeas and faba beans at this point, resistant.
Okay, so there's more resistant crops, so does it still perpetuate Aphanomyces then? Because if the spores are gathering on the root systems, is it going to perpetuate it in the fields?
And it'll depend on the environmental conditions of that year and the soil type. Don't you love it when we give you that political answer of it depends? It
depends.
But,
it always depends.
I would say, like, you know, if you are in an area of the province where you're growing peas and then you try lentils, no, bad idea. Both really, really susceptible, not an option. If you're in an area of the province where maybe chickpeas is an option, it may potentially increase oospore loads, not near the amount, but it could potentially increase the oospore loads because they are germinating, they are swimming around, so potentially you are increasing your oospore loads. Not like significantly, like if you were to put a pea lentil in there, but could potentially contribute a little bit. Same with faba beans. Again, we're monitoring that and keep an eye on it. But lupins, don't have to worry. You can put that in there and you'll have no problems.
That's great.
It won't make the problem worse.
Right. And I guess my other question too, because growers, sometimes they'll think, okay, I'll put into forages for 5 years. So what about alfalfa? Or I think you mentioned vetch earlier.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about those.
And again, that is one thing that we don't have 100% understanding, but I can say that alfalfa has a variable response. So it is not a non-host and it is not truly resistant. So alfalfa could make your problem worse. Okay. And vetch is susceptible. So if you're putting hairy vetch into your forage, you potentially could be making your problem worse. Okay?
Interesting.
And the thing about forage crops is, of course, they're not annual, right? So if you're putting vetch or or alfalfa into a field, it's probably going to be there for 4 years, 5 years maybe, depending how long you leave it into a forage crop. So you could be making your problem actually worse, depending. Again, probably not as bad as if you put like a highly susceptible crop in there.
Peas or something in.
But it's definitely something that you would need to monitor. So I always say just, take soil samples, monitor your levels, and keep an eye on your fields. Because you might have an Aphanomyces problem in your field, but if it's not a wet year, you might not actually know that. So yeah, so the Aphanomyces is a little bit complicated, Amber. It's one of those ones that we're putting lots and lots of funding into trying to figure it out and understand it more and figure out all these
nuances.
The nuances.
So let's briefly touch on soil sampling.
Sure.
What does soil sampling for Aphanomyces look like, and what can be done if a grower sees that there is a risk of Aphanomyces in their field?
So soil sampling is, again, only as good as a soil sampler. The more samples you have, the better you are at getting an accurate picture of what's going on in your field. Right now, we can take soil samples, and there's numerous labs that you can send them to, and they will say yes or no. Yes, there's Aphanomyces in your field or not. Some of the labs are getting a little bit better, being able to give you a bit of a concentration. But unfortunately, Aphanomyces is a pathogen that really likes to cluster. So you'll have a cluster of a lot of Aphanomyces spores in one area. So if you soil sample either side of it, you're going to come back negative. Oh, there's no Aphanomyces in my field. If you only sample the low areas and the wetter areas where you're more likely to find it early on, you're going to sample there and you're going to be like, my field is full of Aphanomyces, when actually it might not actually be that bad. So it's a little bit tricky. So I would say the more really good soil sampling, the more samples you take, the better, for sure. We are working on, and I say we, Dr. Shama Chatterton is leading the study of Aphanomyces on the prairies, especially for Alberta, and she's working on trying to figure out, okay, so I found some spores in my field, and there's this many. There's like 100,000 spores per gram of soil. What does that mean? We're trying to figure that out. We haven't been able to say this many spores equals a problem. We were able to do that under controlled conditions in greenhouses, but in a field it's going to vary so much. It's going to depend on the environment, the field history, all of that stuff.
Elevation.
Right? Yeah, elevation, compaction, pH. So it's going to depend on all of that, whether you have a bit of a problem. So soil sampling is important, and it's definitely a good idea. But be mindful of the samples. Take as many as you can. Don't just do the low areas. Don't just do the high areas. And something that we've been talking to farmers a lot recently is to keep an eye on your fields, right? Like if it's a dry year and you have peas there and they, Aphanomyces isn't necessarily going to be a problem, doesn't mean the spores aren't there, doesn't mean you don't have Aphanomyces in your field. This wasn't a problem in a dry year, right? Sometimes we'll see areas of the field, like low areas, we'll see patches, which is an indication there's a problem coming, but you might still be okay for peas, for that year. If you see it corner to corner, obviously not. So
you might want to avoid it.
I think it's important to keep an eye on your fields. What did it look like when it had peas last time? Was it a wet year? How many years ago did you have peas? All those considerations will hopefully keep the spore levels down
and help with some decision making.
And help with the decision making
when it comes on farm.
I think as far as if you have a field that has Aphanomyces in it and it has affected your yields and it's problematic, stay away from them for we're saying 6 to 8 years. And if it's possible in your area, grow some faba beans. And we're working on lupins. quite there yet. I don't want to say that, you know, go put lupins in, but we're definitely looking at that as an option, and one of the things that's driving the research into that crop. So hopefully we might have some options there. So
well, it's great to see some alternatives coming out, some alternative
so.
pulses. And thank you so much for the information. That was Robyne Davidson on Real Agriculture.